In a quiet suburb outside of Chicago, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other by name, there lived a man who could make anyone laugh. His name was John Wayne Gacy, and by all appearances, he was just another face in the crowd, smiling at the supermarket, waving at neighbors from behind the wheel of his car, and always ready to lend a hand. He was the kind of man who hosted large backyard barbecues, organized charity events, and even dressed up as a clown for sick children in hospitals. He called his character Pogo the Clown. With his bright red nose, oversized shoes, and colorful costume, Pogo had a way of making children giggle and parents smile. People loved him. "He's always so kind," one neighbor recalled. "Always helping someone, always putting in the work for the community." No one suspected a thing. Behind the painted smile and warm handshakes, Gacy was hiding something darker than anyone could imagine. A secret so twisted that when the truth finally surfaced, it shook not just the neighborhood, but the entire country. It all began with whispers. A teenager named Rob Piest had gone missing after a job interview with Gacy. His mother was waiting in the car outside the pharmacy where Rob worked. He had only gone in to talk to Gacy about a construction job. He said it wouldn't take more than 10 minutes. But 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then an hour. His mother never saw her son again. That night, police filed a missing persons report. Rob was a good kid, honest, hardworking, never got into trouble. His parents were devastated. His friends were confused. He would never just disappear, one classmate said. Not without telling someone. Gacy, meanwhile, acted like nothing had happened. When detectives first interviewed John Wayne Gacy, he was calm and collected. Too calm, in fact. He explained that yes, he had met Rob that day, but insisted he didn't know where the boy had gone. "I gave him a few details about the job," Gacy said, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. "That was it. He left. End of story." But something didn't sit right with the investigators. Gacy's answers were rehearsed, too smooth. And when they checked his background, things became murky. He had spent time in prison years earlier, for crimes involving young boys. It was supposed to be sealed, but word got out. Still, there wasn't enough to arrest him. Yet. So they watched him. Detectives followed Gacy everywhere, his home, his job sites, even his visits to fast food joints late at night. They noted the odd hours he kept, the young men he sometimes brought home. Then they talked to former employees. Several had stories to tell. One said he had been invited over for drinks, then felt uncomfortable when Gacy tried to handcuff him, as a joke. Another described seeing strange stains in Gacy's garage. But none had enough proof. As the pressure mounted, Gacy began to unravel. He was no longer the smiling man in clown shoes. He started drinking more. Staying out all night. Rambling about politics and conspiracies to anyone who would listen. He told a friend, "You know, I've done things. Bad things. Real bad." The friend laughed it off. But it wasn't a joke. Detectives obtained a search warrant. What they found inside Gacy's modest-looking house would haunt them forever. The house on 8213 West Summerdale Avenue looked like any other. A little cluttered, perhaps, but nothing out of the ordinary. When officers stepped inside, they were met by a sharp, foul odor, like mildew, mixed with something else. Something harder to describe. Gacy shrugged it off. "Oh, that. Probably just a dead animal in the crawl space," he said, forcing a chuckle. "I've been meaning to get under there and clean it out." But that excuse wasn't enough. The warrant allowed them to look around. At first, they found small things. Driver's licenses that didn't belong to Gacy, handcuffs, a box of male IDs, even high school class rings. In the hallway, a trapdoor led to the crawl space below. One officer knelt down to lift it open. A blast of air rolled out, stagnant, putrid. The kind that clings to your clothes and settles in your lungs. Cautiously, they descended into the narrow crawl space. It was dark, the ceiling low, the dirt floor uneven. They shone their flashlights around, and then, one of them froze. There, partially buried in the earth, was a human bone. "Call it in," the officer whispered, heart pounding. "This is a crime scene." Word spread fast. Police cordoned off the house and began the slow, methodical process of excavation. One body was found. Then another. And another. By the time they were done, the total reached 29 in the crawl space alone. The community was stunned. Parents who had once hired Gacy to build additions on their homes now wondered, had their children been near a killer? One neighbor asked herself aloud, how could we not have known? How could nobody see? The clown makeup had hidden it all. By now, John Wayne Gacy was in custody. He sat in an interrogation room, slouched in a plastic chair, his face pale and sweaty. Gone was the polished, confident man who had played pogo at birthday parties. This was someone else, tired, broken, and trapped in his own lies. One detective sat across from him, calm but direct. "John, we found the bodies. We need you to start talking." At first, Gacy denied everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Those boys must have. I don't know, snuck in. I didn't put them there." But the weight of the evidence was crushing. Eventually, Gacy cracked. He spoke slowly at first, as if rehearsing in his mind. Then the words poured out. Details. Names. The order in which it all happened. Some victims he remembered clearly. Others he referred to only by vague descriptions. The kid with the red shirt, the one who cried a lot. Many of the boys were runaways. Others had been lured by promises of work. Some he even picked up at bus stations. He would offer them a warm meal, a few bucks, maybe even a place to stay for the night. They never left. The most chilling part wasn't just the murders, it was the calm way he spoke about them. Like he was describing the weather. Sometimes, Gacy said, you get used to the feeling of control. It's like, no one can stop you. Not even yourself. Detectives were stunned by his indifference. Among the remains, some victims still had no names. Investigators began the heartbreaking task of identifying them, through dental records, missing person reports, and in some cases, personal items found near the bodies. But some were never claimed. To this day, 5 of Gacy's victims remain unidentified. The trial of John Wayne Gacy began in 1980, and the world watched in shock. The courtroom was packed every day. Reporters with notepads in hand, families of victims sitting in silence, and jurors who knew this case would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Gacy's lawyers attempted an insanity defense. They argued that no sane man could do what Gacy had done. That only a mind detached from reality could commit such acts and go on living a normal life outside of them. But the prosecution was ready. They painted a vivid picture of a manipulative man, one who lived a double life. One face was the smiling contractor, the clown for hire. The other was the predator, one who planned, lured, and executed without remorse. Testimony after testimony piled up. Young men who had survived close encounters with Gacy stepped forward. One described how Gacy had tricked him into trying on handcuffs as part of a magic trick. When he couldn't get them off, Gacy leaned in close and whispered, "You're not going anywhere now." That witness escaped. Many others did not. The jury listened quietly. Photos of the crawl space were shown in court. The room fell silent more than once. One woman gasped when a photo of a class ring, later identified as belonging to one of the missing boys, was shown. In his closing argument, the lead prosecutor said, "This man dressed as a clown. But clowns are meant to bring joy, not fear." And beneath the face paint of John Wayne Gacy was not a broken man, but a monster who knew exactly what he was doing. After 5 weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours. The verdict: guilty on all 33 counts of murder. The sentence was swift and final: death. John Wayne Gacy was sent to death row at Menard Correctional Center in Illinois, where he remained for 14 years. While awaiting execution, he gave interviews, some calm, some combative. He often insisted he was innocent, that the police planted evidence, that he was being framed. But no one believed him anymore. The mask had fallen. In prison, Gacy took up painting. Strangely, many of his paintings featured clowns. Some were of himself as Pogo. Others depicted children, balloons, or abstract shapes in garish colors. His artwork became a controversial subject. Some collectors saw it as murderabilia, others saw it as disgusting. Yet people bought them. When asked why he painted so many clowns, Gacy once said, "Clowns can get away with murder." On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His final meal: fried chicken, shrimp, fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. His final words: a cold, careless kiss my ***. And just like that, the men who haunted Chicago's suburbs, the men who buried 29 young boys beneath his home, was gone. But the fear remained. The case of the killer clown changed how America saw its neighbors, its trust, and its understanding of evil. Gacy was proof that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they wear red noses and painted smiles. In the days following Gacy's execution, something strange happened. The neighborhood surrounding his old house grew eerily quiet. Families no longer let their children play on the sidewalks. Mailboxes were left empty longer. That stretch of Summerdale Avenue became a place you drove past quickly, with the windows rolled up. Eventually, the house was torn down. The lot stood empty for years. Some said the ground felt cursed, others just didn't want to live where the bodies were found. A new home was eventually built, but the address was changed. People still whisper about it, especially around Halloween. Reporters revisited the story over and over. News specials, books, and documentaries flooded the media. Everyone was asking the same question: how could this have happened unnoticed for so long? Neighbors, investigators, even victims' families admitted the same thing: Gacy didn't look like a killer. He was charming, polite, and always seemed busy. He wore suits. He donated money. He even took photos with first ladies and politicians at public events. One former police officer said in an interview, he didn't just hide his crimes. He hid behind society's own blind spots. We trusted appearances more than instincts. The real horror of the Gacy case wasn't just the killings, it was how easy it had been for him to keep doing them. He was the friend at the barbecue, the man in the clown costume, the neighbor next door. Among the 33 victims found, most were eventually identified. Families wept as names were confirmed. Mothers who had spent years searching for sons were given final answers. Some said it gave them peace. Others said it only opened new wounds. But 5 of the boys were never named. They had no dental records. No missing person reports that matched. No families had come forward. Some were likely runaways, boys who slipped through the cracks of the system, forgotten long before Gacy ever found them. Their graves were marked only by numbers. Years later, the Cook County Sheriff's Office created a task force dedicated to identifying these unknown victims. They exhumed remains and collected DNA, hoping new technology could offer answers the 1970s couldn't. Slowly, some progress was made. In 2011, one of the unknown boys was finally identified as William Bundy, a 19-year-old construction worker who disappeared in 1976. His family had assumed he ran away. His sister, who had given a DNA sample, cried when she heard the news. "I just wanted to know where he was," she said. "Now I finally do." The remaining victims still wait. To this day, police ask anyone with a missing male relative from the 1970s to come forward. It's a painful chapter, but one not yet closed. For the families who never knew what happened to their sons, the truth remains buried with a man who wore a painted smile. Long after Gacy's death, his name still lingers like a shadow in American culture. True crime authors, filmmakers, and podcasters all revisit his case time and time again. Not just because of the horror of what he did, but because of how easily he walked among us. The idea that someone could kill more than 30 people, while smiling, while joking, while hosting birthday parties, is something that never truly left the public mind. Even today, Gacy's face appears on documentaries, book covers, and late-night specials. But it's not always his real face that people remember. It's the clown, the costume, the red nose, the wide painted grin. Pogo the clown became a symbol of how evil can wear a disguise. Gacy didn't just kill his victims. He destroyed a sense of innocence. For years, clowns were seen as harmless entertainers. But after Gacy, the fear began to grow. Stories of evil clowns surged in popular culture. Horror movies, urban legends, and Halloween costumes began to reflect that fear. It wasn't just about clowns being creepy anymore. It was because once, one of them had been real. "I used to love seeing clowns when I was little," one woman said in a documentary. After Gacy, "I couldn't even look at one without getting chills." The idea that horror could wear a happy face was something the world didn't forget. For all the pain Gacy caused, there were some who survived his grasp. Boys who escaped. Teenagers who were lucky, or perhaps strong, enough to get away before the nightmare began. One of them, Jeffrey Rignall, had a story that stood out. He met Gacy in 1978. The man had offered him a ride, a drink, and friendly conversation. Within minutes, everything changed. Rignall was chloroformed, bound, and taken to Gacy's house. He remembered flashes of consciousness, bright lights, the sound of a garage door, a feeling of helplessness. Somehow, he was dumped in a park hours later, bruised and terrified, but alive. Jeffrey went to the police, but they didn't take him seriously. Gacy was too upstanding, too clean-cut. They dismissed it as a misunderstanding. A warning sign ignored. Years later, Rignall testified against Gacy at trial. His words were clear and sharp. "I know what he is," he told the court. "And I know I was one of the lucky ones." Other survivors shared similar experiences, tricks with handcuffs, being invited into Gacy's home, a sudden shift from friendliness to fear. Each of them carried invisible scars. And though their stories were rarely told in full, they became the voices for those who could no longer speak. Every time they stepped forward, it helped paint the full picture of who John Wayne Gacy really was. A man who wore a mask to hide his darkness. And one who was almost never caught at all. After his arrest and conviction, psychologists and criminologists studied Gacy intensely. He wasn't like most killers they'd encountered. He didn't show the usual signs of madness, no hallucinations, no voices in his head, no clear break from reality. Instead, he was calculating. A chameleon. He adapted to whatever situation he was in. Around police officers, he was polite and cooperative. Around victims, he was cold and dominant. Around the public, he was cheerful and generous. This ability to switch faces, to shift tones at will, made him especially dangerous. Some experts labeled him a malignant narcissist, someone who saw others as tools, not people. Others described him as a psychopath, pointing to his lack of empathy, his manipulation, and his complete absence of guilt. He didn't kill out of rage, one profiler noted. He killed out of control. Out of power. out of the need to be the god in someone else's story, even if it ended in death. Interviews with Gacy revealed chilling patterns. He saw his victims as disposable. He blamed them, not himself. He often said things like, "They came to me," or "They knew what they were getting into." Even in his final years, he maintained a twisted view of the world. In the end, Gacy wasn't just a killer. He was a predator who wore many masks, and believed that none of them would ever be removed. Though John Wayne Gacy was executed in 1994, the legacy of his crimes continued to ripple through time. The families of the victims never truly moved on. For some, the pain turned into activism. They spoke at schools about safety. They advocated for better resources to track missing children. For others, the silence lingered, grief that couldn't be voiced, memories that refused to fade. In 2012, DNA technology gave law enforcement new hope. A team from Cook County reopened the cold case files tied to the unidentified victims. They began collecting DNA from families with missing male relatives from the 1970s. "We know Gacy didn't remember all their names," said one officer, "but we owe it to them to remember who they were." Bit by bit, new identifications were made. But some victims still remain unknown, their stories buried under decades of dust and silence. Meanwhile, Gacy's infamy began to merge with myth. His name appeared in horror novels, haunted house attractions, and even dark jokes. But for those who lived through the nightmare, it was never fiction. One journalist who covered the trial summed it up simply. "He was a man who reminded us how easy it is to trust the wrong face." The story of the killer clown is not just about murder. It's about deception. About looking evil in the eyes and not recognizing it until it's far too late. And that, perhaps, is what makes it truly terrifying. After the horrors were uncovered in Gacy's home, the city of Chicago faced a grim decision: what to do with the property at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. For a time, the house sat empty, surrounded by yellow police tape and haunted stares from neighbors. No one wanted to buy it. Realtors didn't even want to list it. People crossed the street just to avoid walking near the lot. Eventually, the city demolished it. The crawl space where the bodies had been buried was filled in. The foundation was destroyed. Grass slowly crept back over the soil. A blank patch of earth where so much pain had occurred. And yet, no matter how many weeds grew over the lot, people remembered. Some believed the place was cursed. Paranormal investigators visited at night. Teenagers dared each other to sneak onto the property. Even after a new house was built and the address changed, there were still whispers, low, unsettled conversations about the evil that once lived there. One neighbor later recalled, "Every time I look out the kitchen window, I see that yard. It looks normal now. But I remember what they pulled from underneath." Places can forget. But people rarely do. And this was a house that never should have been remembered, but always would be. In his final years, John Wayne Gacy remained cold, arrogant, and disturbingly self-assured. He gave interviews to journalists and filmmakers, often denying responsibility for the murders. He called the police corrupt. He claimed that other people had planted the bodies in his crawl spa. He even said, more than once, "I sleep just fine." But his art told a different story. Dozens of paintings poured from his prison cell. Most featured clowns, some smiling, some frowning, others with wide, staring eyes. Some of them were of Pogo, the character he had created to entertain children. Others were more abstract, nightmarish and distorted. Strangely, collectors emerged from the shadows, offering money for Gacy's artwork. Some saw it as historical, others as disturbing memorabilia. Victims' families protested the sales, calling it exploitation of tragedy. Still, the paintings sold. Some ended up in museums. Others were burned in protest. In the end, Gacy's legacy wasn't just one of murder. It was of manipulation, even from behind bars. He played the role of misunderstood man, of artist, of victim. But the world had seen through the paint. On May 10, 1994, at Stateville Correctional Center, the curtain finally fell. As the drugs entered his veins, witnesses said Gacy's breathing became shallow. His chest rose and fell once more. Then, silence. The killer clown was gone. But his final trick had already been played, leaving behind a story so dark, so surreal, that people would tell it for generations. After Gacy's execution, many of his personal belongings were boxed up and placed into storage: drawings, letters, clothing, and yes, the infamous clown paintings. For a while, they sat untouched. Then came the collectors. Some were true crime enthusiasts. Others were simply drawn by the taboo. Gacy's items began appearing at auctions. Some sold for hundreds of dollars. Others for thousands. One man paid nearly $10,000 for an original Pogo the Clown painting. But not everyone was fascinated. The families of Gacy's victims were horrified. They pleaded for laws to prevent killers from profiting or being glorified after death. One mother said through tears, "My son's life was taken by that man. Now people hang his art on their walls like he was a rock star." In response, a group of victims' families banded together and began buying up Gacy's artwork themselves, not to keep it, but to destroy it. One event was held in Naperville, Illinois. A private property. A bonfire. Over 24 of Gacy's paintings were thrown into the flames. As the pieces curled, cracked, and melted in the heat, there was a silence among the onlookers. Not joy. Not revenge. Just release. "He doesn't deserve to be remembered with color," said one of the fathers in attendance. "Only in black and white. The facts. The truth. And the pain he caused." One of the most disturbing aspects of John Wayne Gacy's crimes was just how normal he appeared to be. He was a successful businessman. He ran a construction company called PDM Contractors. He worked hard. He employed local teens. He even gave second chances to young men with criminal records. To the world, Gacy looked like a model citizen. He attended church. He joined local organizations. He even became the vice president of a civic group called the Norwood Park Township Street Lighting Committee. He was, in every sense, involved. He even once posed for a photo with First Lady Rosalind Carter, smiling broadly, wearing a pin that indicated he had passed Secret Service background checks. That photo would later horrify the nation. How could someone like that slip through the cracks? How could background checks and badges and suits mask the truth so completely? Psychologists call it the mask of sanity, a disturbing trait shared by many high-functioning sociopaths. They mimic human empathy. They fake charm. They appear stable and likable. But behind the scenes, their inner world is cold and predatory. Gacy perfected this mask. He wore it in church. He wore it at work. And he wore it even as police closed in. Smiling, shaking hands, laughing. Until the paint peeled off. And the truth crawled from beneath the floor. The city of Chicago, a place known for its grit and pride, would never be the same after the Gacy case. Local police departments faced criticism. Many asked how Gacy was able to slip by for so long. Complaints had been filed. Victims had spoken up. A survivor even identified him. And yet, nothing happened until it was too late. Some officers blamed a lack of resources. Others admitted they simply hadn't believed the stories. In the late 1970s, the idea of a serial killer, especially one preying on boys, was still unfamiliar territory. Law enforcement wasn't trained to look for patterns. There was no centralized database for missing persons. No DNA registry. No national alert system. Gacy took full advantage of that. He targeted boys who were often ignored, runaways, kids kicked out of their homes, teens trying to make quick money. He knew society wouldn't look too hard when they vanished. But after his arrest, that changed. New laws were passed. Funding increased. National databases were created to help track missing youth. And investigators became more aware of the signs, patterns of grooming, of predatory behavior hiding in plain sight. The Gacy case was a scar, one the city wore for decades. And even though the streets eventually filled with laughter and life again, the shadow of what happened on Somerdale Avenue never fully faded. Not in the minds of the families. Not in the hearts of the officers who walked into that crawl space. Not in the silence that followed the final verdict. For every article written about John Wayne Gacy, there are still only a handful that focus on the victims, the boys who never got to grow up, whose faces faded from news coverage long before the trial ended. They were more than numbers. Timothy McCoy, age 15, was Gacy's first known victim. He was just passing through town when Gacy picked him up. The young boy had dreams of traveling. He liked music. He had a kind face. John Butkovich, age 18, had once worked for Gacy. He disappeared after going to confront him about unpaid wages. His car was later found near his home. His family never stopped looking. Samuel Stapleton, 14, and Randall Reffitt, 15, were friends. They vanished within days of each other. They were found buried side by side, as if Gacy couldn't even separate them in death. Robert Gilroy, 18, was the son of a Chicago police sergeant. William Kindred, Michael Marino, Gregory Godzik, the list went on. They were sons, brothers, friends. Each had a life waiting ahead. Some loved sports. Others wanted to be mechanics, musicians, or travel the country. They never got the chance. Too often, their names were overshadowed by Gacy's. Their faces lost in the glare of headlines. But behind every photo was a story. A voice. A family left with an empty seat at the table. And in telling this story, their names must be remembered, spoken aloud, carried forward. Because they were not just victims of a killer. They were children who deserved the world. The story of John Wayne Gacy is more than a tale of horror. It's a cautionary lesson about trust, vigilance, and the shadows that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. In the years since Gacy's crimes were revealed, law enforcement agencies across the world have taken steps to improve how they respond to missing persons reports, especially those involving young people. New protocols, awareness programs, and victim support services have been established to make sure voices are heard before it's too late. Schools began teaching children about stranger danger and the importance of speaking up if something feels wrong. Communities grew closer, more watchful. But the darkness Gacy brought to light also serves as a reminder: evil doesn't always wear a scary face. It doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, it smiles at you from across the street. Sometimes, it juggles balloons at a birthday party. And sometimes, it hides behind a mask of kindness and charm. The legacy of the killer clown urges us to look beyond appearances. To trust our instincts. To protect the vulnerable. Because when we do, we honor those who were lost, and work to stop future tragedies. Today, decades after the last body was found beneath that Chicago home, efforts continue to remember the boys who were stolen from the world by John Wayne Gacy. Memorials stand quietly in cemeteries. Families hold private gatherings on anniversaries. Cold case detectives never give up hope that the unidentified victims will one day be named. Each name recovered is a victory, a chance for a family to find peace. And the story of the killer clown, while dark, is also a story of resilience. Of communities refusing to forget. Of survivors finding their voices. It reminds us that even in the deepest shadows, there is light. That healing, though slow, is possible. And that while one man may have worn a mask to hide his evil, the truth always finds a way to shine through. For those who listen, remember, and share this story, the victims will never be forgotten. And the world will always remain vigilant. The investigation into John Wayne Gacy's crimes revealed many flaws in how missing person cases were handled in the 1970s. At that time, there was little coordination between police departments, and many runaways or homeless teens were dismissed as troublemakers rather than potential victims. Gacy exploited these gaps. He targeted young men who were easy to overlook. He knew the system would not search for them thoroughly. After his arrest, law enforcement agencies began pushing for change. They advocated for better record-keeping, nationwide databases, and communication between cities. The National Crime Information Center, NCIC, expanded its role in tracking missing persons. Victim advocacy groups formed to provide support for families left in the dark. They worked to create programs that would prevent youth from slipping through the cracks, teaching them about personal safety and empowerment. The case also led to better forensic methods, with police learning the importance of preserving crime scenes and evidence meticulously. While Gacy's crimes were a tragedy, they sparked important reforms, turning a dark chapter into a catalyst for progress. Pogo the Clown, a character created by John Wayne Gacy, was originally meant to be joyful and entertaining. Gacy performed as Pogo at hospitals, parades, and children's parties, wearing a colorful costume, with a red nose and painted smile. But after the truth came out, Pogo became a symbol of terror. The idea of a killer clown planted itself deeply in popular culture. Movies like it and countless horror stories drew on this fear, portraying clowns as sinister figures lurking in the shadows. For many people, the smile of a clown no longer feels innocent. Psychologists call this phenomenon coulrophobia, the fear of clowns. For those who know the story of Gacy, that fear has real roots. Interestingly, some survivors of Gacy's crimes have spoken about their trauma, not just from the violence, but from the way he used the clown persona to lure victims. The bright colors and humor were a mask, a way to disarm suspicion and gain trust. It was the perfect disguise for a man hiding unimaginable evil. The legend of the killer clown reminds us how appearances can deceive, and why it's important to look beyond the surface. While John Wayne Gacy's name became infamous, the stories of those who escaped his grasp are equally powerful and important. One survivor, Timothy O'Rourke, was just 16 when Gacy lured him into his home. "I thought he was just being friendly," Timothy recalled years later. But when Gacy tried to handcuff him, something inside Timothy snapped. Using all his strength, he broke free and ran out the front door into the night. Timothy's courage saved his life. But the trauma stayed with him for decades. Another survivor, John Mowry, managed to escape after Gacy left him bound but unattended. His quick thinking and desperation kept him alive until he found help. Their testimonies played a critical role during the trial, giving victims a voice and helping law enforcement understand Gacy's methods. For years, these survivors lived with fear and silence. Speaking out took incredible bravery. But by sharing their stories, they helped others understand the importance of vigilance and the power of survival. Their resilience reminds us that even in the darkest moments, hope can survive. As the years passed on death row, John Wayne Gacy remained defiant. He wrote letters, gave interviews, and tried to control his narrative. But in the end, the law caught up with him. On May 10, 1994, in a small chamber at Stateville Correctional Center, Gacy faced his final moments. Witnesses say he showed little remorse. His last meal included fried chicken, shrimp, French fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. His last words were blunt and cold. "Kiss my ass." After the lethal injection took effect, the room fell silent. A man who had once hidden behind a painted smile was gone. Though he is gone, the scars he left behind remain, for families, survivors, and the city that still remembers the terror of the killer clown. Deep inside prison walls, far from the public eye, John Wayne Gacy wrestled with his own demons. Some nights, he stared at the cell ceiling, lost in thought. Was it regret? Fear? Or something darker? One night, a prison guard found Gacy quietly humming a tune, the same circus melody he used to play as Pogo the Clown. "Why do you do that?" the guard asked quietly. Gacy looked up with a faint smile. "It reminds me of a world that didn't suspect me." He spoke calmly, eerily, as if detached from the weight of his crimes. A mask can hide many things. Sometimes even from yourself. That night, the guard left disturbed, wondering what truly lived behind those painted smiles. Imagine a quiet suburban street, festive balloons tied to mailboxes, children's laughter echoing under a clear blue sky. The scene of innocence. Now imagine the same street, years before the horror was uncovered, when Gacy, in full Pogo costume, arrived at a child's birthday party. He juggled brightly colored balls and made balloon animals. The kids laughed, the parents smiled, the sun shone. But behind the scenes, in Gacy's mind, a storm was brewing. One boy tugged at his sleeve, asking for a balloon dog. Gacy bent down, the painted smile fixed, and said softly, "You want a dog? I'll give you the best dog ever." No one knew then that behind the laughter, darkness lurked, waiting patiently for the next victim. One summer evening, a young man named Mark Hoffman was last seen heading towards Gacy's construction site. Mark had just turned 17 and was looking for work to help support his family. He was a hard worker, polite and cautious, but hopeful. Gacy had promised him a few dollars and a chance to learn the trade. Mark didn't know what waited behind the office door, the subtle shift in Gacy's gaze, the way his smile stiffened when the two were alone. That night, Mark vanished. His family reported him missing, but the trail quickly went cold. It was only years later, when the crawl space was excavated, that fragments of Mark's story were uncovered, bones and belongings that whispered the truth. During one of his rare moments of candor, Gacy gave a chilling confession to his prison psychiatrist. He spoke in a low, even voice. "I didn't want to be a monster. I tried to be normal. But the darkness, it's a part of me." He described the thrill of control, the power over life and death that came with each victim. He talked about the mask he wore, both literally and figuratively. "I was the clown outside," he said. "But inside, I was something else." The psychiatrist noted the absence of remorse, replaced by a cold fascination with his own crimes. This confession offered a glimpse into the mind of a man whose evil was calculated, not chaotic. On a warm spring afternoon in 1977, a small backyard in Chicago was filled with balloons, cake, and children's laughter. John Wayne Gacy, dressed as Pogo the Clown, arrived as the surprise guest for a young boy's 6th birthday. He performed tricks, twisted balloon animals, and told jokes. The children watched in awe, forgetting the world outside. But behind the painted smile, Gacy's mind was elsewhere, planning, calculating. One small boy tugged at Gacy's sleeve, asking for a balloon dog. Gacy knelt, looked into the boy's eyes, and said softly, "Let's make it the best dog you've ever had." For that afternoon, no one suspected the horror that waited in the years to come. In the quiet hours of the night, when the city slept, whispers began to circulate in the neighborhoods around Gacy's home. Children who had been invited inside sometimes spoke of strange noises, creaks, muffled thuds, and a faint smell of something sour. A teenage boy told a friend, "I heard a door slam, but no one answered when I knocked." Another mentioned seeing a shadow move beneath a basement window, just before dawn. At the time, neighbors dismissed the stories as imagination or prank. But after the crawl space was uncovered, those whispers took on a terrifying new meaning. As the police investigation intensified, the area around Gacy's home became a hive of activity. Detectives set up surveillance, watching for any suspicious behavior. Neighbors who had once admired Gacy now looked at his house with suspicion and fear. Some reported hearing strange noises late at night. Others noticed unfamiliar visitors coming and going. One night, an officer on watch spotted Gacy entering the house with a young man. The men never emerged. When officers later knocked on the door, Gacy's demeanor shifted instantly, from jovial contractor to guarded suspect. It was clear the man behind the facade was finally losing control. The moment the officers opened the trapdoor to the crawl space, they were met with a stench so foul it turned their stomachs. Flashlights swept the dark, cramped space where dirt had been disturbed recently. Suddenly, a bone caught the light, a femur, partially buried. Officers exchanged grim looks. As they began to dig, the grim reality unfolded, the remains of numerous victims, some wrapped, some buried in shallow graves. The scene was unimaginable, a house built over a nightmare. This discovery would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case and forever scar the city's memory. News of the gruesome discovery spread quickly, igniting a media frenzy. Reporters descended on Chicago, cameras flashing as they captured the shocked faces of neighbors and families. Headlines screamed, "The killer clown's secret," and "Bodies found beneath a man's home." Every detail was scrutinized, the clown costume, the construction business, the smiling facade. The public grappled with disbelief. How could a man who played with children also bury dozens of victims in his own home? Experts were called to analyze Gacy's psychology, while the city mourned collectively. The courtroom was tense as John Wayne Gacy faced trial. The prosecution laid out a chilling case, presenting evidence piece by piece, remains, personal effects, survivor testimonies. Defense lawyers argued insanity, painting Gacy as a broken man. Boo. Witnesses told a different story. Survivors described manipulation and violence, neighbors testified about suspicious behavior, and forensic experts detailed the grim discoveries. Gacy remained calm, often smiling politely, trying to maintain control. The jury listened intently, understanding the gravity of the crime. Weeks of intense testimony and evidence presentation, the jury retired to deliberate. They faced a difficult task, deciding the fate of a man accused of some of the most heinous crimes in recent history. Outside the courtroom, families of victims waited anxiously, hoping for justice. Inside, jurors pored over details, numbers, dates, witness statements, looking for truth amid horror. After less than 2 hours, they returned. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Gasps filled the room, some cried, others sat in stunned silence. Justice had been served, but the wounds remained. John Wayne Gacy was sentenced to death and sent to Menard Correctional Center. His days became routine, hours of solitude, brief moments of exercise, limited contact with the outside world. He continued painting, creating dozens of clown portraits that many found disturbing. Interviews revealed a man still defiant, unwilling to fully admit guilt. Prison guards reported a chilling calmness in Gacy, as if he were at peace with his fate. And while the world outside tried to heal, the killer clown awaited his final sentence. Despite overwhelming evidence, John Wayne Gacy's legal team filed multiple appeals, hoping to delay the inevitable. They argued procedural errors and challenged the insanity verdict. But the courts remained firm. Victims' families watched each hearing with heavy hearts, hoping for closure. The appeals stretched over years, dragging out the painful memories for all involved. Meanwhile, Gacy maintained his innocence, using every opportunity to deny responsibility. The slow march toward justice continued, inching ever closer to the final day. On May 10, 1994, the day arrived. Gacy was led to the execution chamber at Stateville Correctional Center. His final meal was simple yet symbolic: fried chicken, shrimp, fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. He was strapped to the gurney, the lethal injection prepared. Witnesses watched in silence as the drugs were administered. His breathing slowed, then stopped. A man who had terrorized a city was gone. But the story, the horror, would never be forgotten. After Gacy's execution, Chicago's neighborhood struggled to heal. Families of victims gathered for memorials, seeking peace and remembrance. Counselors and support groups offered solace to survivors and loved ones still grappling with trauma. But the city itself felt changed, a place once safe now shadowed by the memories of what had occurred behind closed doors. Schools increased education on personal safety, and community watch programs expanded. People learned to be more vigilant, more protective of those most vulnerable. The scars were deep, but the will to move forward remained strong. The John Wayne Gacy case became a turning point in the fight against serial crimes. Law enforcement agencies improved coordination and introduced new investigative techniques. Awareness campaigns highlighted the importance of listening to missing persons reports, especially when the victims are young and marginalized. Survivors and families became advocates for change, ensuring their loved ones would not be forgotten in statistics. While evil had left its mark, it also sparked a movement toward justice, vigilance, and hope. The story of the killer clown is a reminder, a warning, to never ignore the signs. Years after the trial, whispers of Gacy's crimes still echoed in the minds of those who lived through it. In the quiet corners of Chicago, parents held their children a little tighter,